Before I introduce the panel, I want to introduce Heidi very quickly over here. There are 12 stories of this building, so we definitely encourage you to walk around and explore, and Heidi is an amazing guide. And then Ken. Ken is a dear friend and partner of the Assemblage, and this is a conversation curated by Evolver around blockchain. So Ken's going to tell you a little bit more about Alex and Carolyn and Melinda. Great. Happy to have you all here.
Hey, thanks a lot, Aaron. And thank you all for coming out tonight for the transformational potential of the blockchain. We have three wonderful experts who can explain to us what the blockchain is and why it's got this tremendous opportunity to really transform power dynamics in the society. But first, before we dive into that, I'm curious, how many people here feel they actually know what the blockchain is? Is it fair to say it's about, what, 2/3? How many of you actually are working with the blockchain in some way in your career? Okay, very cool. Among those...
All of the people who know the blockchain almost seem to be working in it. Right. That's not the way it was a few months ago. But
no, exactly. So I'm actually curious, of those who know what the blockchain is, would you be able to say in a sentence, for those of you who don't know what it is? Okay, 2 sentences.
Distributed ledger, a decentralized system that allows for records to be recorded in a distributed fashion, in distributed node fashion.
That's pretty good. Now you get a round of applause for that. But I don't know, I mean, if you stopped me on the street and you just gave that description to me, I would not necessarily feel this is a revolutionary technology that's going to change my life in a tremendously, powerful way. So that is the purpose of our conversation tonight. Alex Gordon-Brander, to my right, is the Chief Technology Officer of Omega One. He is one of the leading designers of trading platforms in the world. Next to him on his right is Melinda Wolf, who leads the Future of Humanity Technology Project, the distributed and decentralized technology stack for the UN's Global Goals for Sustainable Development. And to her right is Carolyn Rectow, Director of Operations at Consensus. She is the co-founder of Fabrique, an identity and reputation management system for communities built on Ethereum. So let's just sort of kick this off. If maybe each of you could briefly talk about what it is that you're doing with the blockchain in your professional engagement and how you feel that is contributing to a societal shift that is worthy of note. Beginning with Alex, why don't we kick it off with you? You want to do it with Carolyn?
yeah.
Okay, Carolyn, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carolyn. So I work with a company called Consensus Systems. Consensus is a venture production studio that builds decentralized applications on a specific type of blockchain called Ethereum. So the people who have heard of blockchain raise your hand if you've heard of Ethereum or smart contracts. Okay, good. So I've been with Consensus for a little over 2 years. Was an early employee, and I started a long time ago, way before the Ethereum blockchain had even had its genesis block, which means actually, came into existence. So Consensus is a really wonderful group of entrepreneurs and technologists that are building a lot of different types of industry use cases, I'd say, for blockchain and decentralizing technologies. So we've got about 30 different projects within our portfolio. And those projects, yes, we have some of the more traditional, you think about Bitcoin and financial services. We do have things around, trading and exchanges. But I think some of the more interesting projects kind of step beyond that initial use case and take a look at things like identity, reputation management, things that might help to govern communities, governance platforms, crowdfunding platforms that could help, support communities, prediction markets, that's something that could also help govern communities. Fun things like gaming and energy grids, decentralized energy grids, the music industry, decentralizing the way that artists get paid and compensated for the work that they do. A lot of other things, that's just a handful. And the wide variety of applications is really one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this technology, and just I wake up every day completely thrilled and amazed that I'm doing this work.
So my name is Melinda, and mine's a little bit different than this context, because my whole purpose for being on this planet is how do we figure out moonshots for the future of humanity. Like, I'm really interested in blockchain specifically because I feel like it is one of the biggest moonshots we have as a collective. But really, ultimately, this mission started because it's like, okay, well, what do we need as a planet? How do we come together and solve the things like clean air, water, solving refugee crises so people have like safety? And so when I got onto this initiative, I realized, the very first thing that I started with is climate restoration, which doesn't really have anything to do with blockchain in this particular context. Although I realized that a lot of smart people at MIT, the physicists I'm working with, have the solutions for the future of humanity, but they don't have permission to do it. And so I went about trying to figure out, like, okay, well, how do I give them permission, which led me to the UN. I've been working with the UN for a while now. And the basic human rights that the UN has set up as the Sustainable Development Goals. Does everyone know what the SDGs are in the room?
Hands?
Yeah?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you a quick overview. So in 2000, there was an initiative called the Millennium Development Goals, where the UN set out to figure out what basic human rights are for the planet, where so much of the percentage of this planet doesn't have clean water, clean food, a place to sleep, all of that. And it evolved into, at the end of 2015, something called the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really just basic human rights, so solving poverty, food for people, all the way up to peace and justice, and looking at partnerships for the goals and how we come together. Climate action, I'm sure everyone in the room has heard about climate action, was something the UN actually did a really great job of putting on a global stage by making it an initiative that they rounded up all the UN nation states to get behind, and they started the process, so now a lot of the planet knows what's happening with the climate. So with this being said, I'm super interested in what's disruptive, and how do we actually take a leap, which is the definition of a moonshot. Like, how does humanity have a destination of where we're headed to? But you don't necessarily get there by a step-by-step process. Like, we actually have to, really have to take a leap, which is, I don't know if most of you know, that's how we got to the moon with JFK. He basically claimed it was possible, and then people started working towards it, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I'm a pretty good creative strategic thinker, but I like leaps. So when I was introduced to blockchain, I'm like, wow, like, this is something that's based on geometry, that is totally decentralized, and that could actually be a solution for the future of humanity. But I wonder if we're just thinking about coins and currency, maybe we're not taking a leap, right? Maybe that's something that can empower people to actually have a different way of spending currency. But what if we were to consider this for social impact? And what if we were to aggregate under solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals, which a lot of people on the planet have agreed that might be a solution for peace on the planet, just getting people out of survival to something more than, basic human needs, right? And so with that, I've been running around collecting up people and projects that I know aggregate against these 17 plus 2. I made up my own 2 sustainable development goals. One of them is the future of humanity. And really just find these solutions that we can actually solve these global problems. And it's been amazing, the ride, because people really want to work towards solutions. So that being said, for me, the power of the blockchain is not just the coin or just the monetary piece that people know about. It's really about the community piece and the way people make agreements towards what we're working towards. So for me, that's a little bit longer than I probably should introducing, but introduced a few concepts, and I'll hand it off to Alex.
What was the question again? What is blockchain and why does it matter?
That's a pretty good summation, but also how your work, what you're doing, very briefly, contributes to why we should be excited about blockchain.
So technology is the kind of magical ritual of our culture that weaves together our stories and our information into power. And blockchain is a radically transformative technology in the way that it operates holographically, where the center is nowhere, the edge is everywhere, and allows different kinds of human relationship to be not only connected through information, which the internet does, but also connected through money, through contract, and through law. So the sort of the hard ends of human social interaction. So that's kind of what is blockchain, and a little bit about why it's important is because magic that operates on a fundamentally different kind of principle that is holographic. There are, in the Ethereum blockchain, there are now 40,000 computers around the world that are all essentially the same computer running the same programs on the same data, keeping constantly in sync with each other around an entire global mesh that you can't really take down or attack very easily. So that thing, as a sort of underlying platform of technos, which technos logos, which impacts the logos, the consciousness of who we are, is like breaking through in lots of interesting ways. In its early days, it's like Internet 1995. We're seeing stuff we kind of guess. But the difference from Internet 1995, and this comes more to what I'm doing, is that Internet was this amazing technology of connectivity, but TCP/IP, which was the protocol that connected computers together that made the Internet, didn't have a sort of monetization framework within it. This is a kind of connectivity that brings with it, my friend Vinay Gupta says blockchain is such an amazing technology that its first use case was the central bank of the internet that's currently worth $70 billion 7 years after a paper was published with no funding. So there's this kind of extraordinary technology. We don't know quite what it's doing yet, but one of the things that I see is that in the same way as back in the 90s, you wouldn't think the New York Times was at threat from livejournal.com, and now traditional media is being kind of eaten by digital media. That sort of traditional finance on Wall Street is going to be kind of absorbed into blockchain, and the entire kind of capital markets infrastructure of the world is going to be kind of rebuilt on different rails, and having an opportunity to be part of that rebuilding and rebuilding the capital markets in a way that they actually aid humanity is my mission and what I'm here to do.
It's very cool. I have to say that we've heard now from the three of you, three very different, wide-ranging ways of working with this technology, and many different things that the technology is capable of doing in theory. But I still, from hearing that, have a hard time understanding exactly why a ledger is that important, and how in any meaningful daily life way it's going to actually impact what I do as a citizen. When I hear about, for instance, the databases essentially in the blockchain are replicated hundreds of thousands or millions of times in different places, making it hard to quote unquote take down, I don't know why I should be particularly excited by that. It doesn't, security is not I know that security is an issue on the internet, but it's not, but I'm just to say, what I'd like to understand is how this technology is going to be used around this question of the personal identity, right? And how in a practical way in my life, it's going to change what I do, aside from banking. Because banking technologies have been changing for 100 years, and it doesn't necessarily make any difference in my life, right? And it certainly hasn't made much difference in politics. So if we were to take it outside of banking, take it outside the financial system, where does the identity piece actually come in?
Well, just to say a thing for a moment about security is the reason why we trust all of these centralized entities like banks and governments and corporations to manage our business for us is because they kind of keep it secure, although they often fail. And so having a system that can be robustly secure, global, and accessible from everywhere, that allows information to be seen and seen around the world, that is a different kind of thing that takes away a need for a lot of central power and then allows basically the banks and the corporations and the governments to have less of a role in our future. That still isn't about how it affects you day to day, but that is, that's what the security buys you.
But so just to say, then to step back, does that mean that I get my own bank? I mean, what do you, like, when you say that we're making smaller banks? I mean, I'm just trying to look at this from a more granular level, right? I don't understand what the implications of that are.
Yeah.
Can you answer that?
Unless someone else has
a stab there. I'll zoom out a little bit and go back to the example that was given of comparing the early days of the internet to where we are right now, right? So the internet was really about the democratization and the decentralization of communication, of information sharing, of data, right? Email and creation of Wikipedia and being able to share information. And in the beginning, I don't think people in 1993 could imagine the different types of, data categories that we would be tracking and we would care so much about and actually have real implications for the way we live our lives and the way we connect. So things like Facebook likes or impressions or, how we record how many steps that you take in your pedometer or things like that. Like that information is culturally significant, and it creates a lot of meaning that we wouldn't have been able to imagine in 1993. So I think your question about well, what does it mean for the individual right now? I guess I don't really have a great answer for you, but I'm the blockchain is, in a similar vein, the democratization of value, the democratization of value transfer, and the ability to create scarcity and transact with participants in a peer-to-peer way. And I think that the innovations on top of that that are going to come in the future, it's kind of hard for us to imagine right now.
So let's just stop with the democratization, which you hear a lot about regarding the blockchain, right? People 20 years ago were saying the democratization of that the internet was going to democratize, content distribution, and then you got Facebook, and you got Google, and you got all of these things layered on top of that decentralized network, which actually ended up centralizing the power of information distribution far more than we had even 20 years ago, before the digital revolution or that dot-com moment. What is there to keep something from being layered on top of the blockchain that would similarly organize the distribution of information through the blockchain in a way that it becomes more centralized and that there's more power, that the powerful can concentrate in that way? What keeps it from that happening?
I mean, so technology is a tool. There is nothing inherent in the blockchain that means it can only be used for good. And there is nothing inherent in going back to the value creation on the blockchain. There's a lot of very rich people from Bitcoin and Ether who are probably going to be richer than anybody who hears about Bitcoin and Ether for the first time today will ever be. And so is that decentralized? Is it centralized? Well, no, I mean, that's just human beings doing their thing. But there is a fundamental thing inherent, like the rules of any game have sort of implications on the sort of social play of the game. It feels different to play some games than others because of their rules. And in the same way, the blockchain game, because it enables more and more to be done by protocol and less to have to be done by groups of humans that are sort of collected together in old school power structures, there is a kind of gradient towards decentralization. Now, decentralization is not all good either. If we were totally decentralized, it would probably be, legal to marry a 12-year-old cousin in some parts of this country. So I don't know. I mean, this may be fine, but, and leaving that on one side,
We don't have to go there.
we don't have to go there. But one interesting thing, the crackdown in China, there are a number of theories that the Chinese government is actually looking to launch, the Central Bank of China launching the PBOC coin and, nationalizing Bitcoin mining, and kind of there's enough weird government data collection in China that is a little Black Mirror-like, that you can see a blockchain being very efficient for that. So by no means is it magic. It just leans a certain way.
So one of the things you do here, again, about blockchain, is that it automates transactions that right now require some kind of institution, right? So there's an assumption that automation is necessarily a good, right? I mean, that is part of that there's a value to it being automated in such a way that a person or some kind of institution doesn't have to be involved. But my question is, it's automated based on some code that's being written by somebody or some group of people who have some values behind the way that they construct the code, right? What is there to make sure that the values of that code writing are in sync with the needs of civil society?
The mores of civil society.
And when has the morals of civil society had any meaningful impact on the creation of information technology in the last 25 years? I mean, really.
Yeah. So, no. It's not about automation. There is a shit ton of automation in finance that has nothing to do with the blockchain. The lines of code of blockchain that automate finance is probably 0.00001% of the automating of code just of transaction finance. It's not that. It's that it reduces friction in transactions, not that it automates them. So it makes relationships cheaper to have with people globally. And that is a thing, just in the same way there is somebody in Ethiopia who I could randomly find and Skype tomorrow and have a conversation with, where 100 years ago it would be much more expensive for me to find that person and have a conversation with them. And that changes the connectivity of the world. When I can actually have financial relationships, set up a business without needing legal counsel in between, and create a transactional relationship incredibly frictionlessly with this person in Ethiopia. That's a different thing. Those relationships don't exist yet. Again, we're talking about enabling, but like, give it 5-10 years, we're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing.
I want to speak to something that might apply, just from my perspective, of the transparency of this, right? So if we think about a big debate that's been happening in the U.S. around the government of like news versus fake news, what is real news, what is fake news? My background's actually in media, so I know how much we drive in media, what people eat, how they live their lives, what they feed their kids, and that's advertising, that's television, that's films, that's social media now. But if you go backwards, I mean, if you look at press, like PR campaigns, and the way things are pushed out, like this stood out to me as a way of like being sickened by the way the PR machine works and what people are fed. And, you know, we're pretty lucky in New York and on the two coasts, right? There's a lot of opportunity for us to know what's actually really going on. But the middle of this country, I don't know how many of you have spent much time, like what's actually sold in the supermarkets, what's pumped through the televisions, what, you know, it's really very apparent how much is just being fed to people. And they don't even have the option of like knowing something different because they don't have any access to it. And so with blockchain, you know, not that that's going to shift that straight away. I mean, I know this is an evolution that's coming, but what's attractive to me is when you put something out, it's distributed, which means you're never going to be able to pull back all the sources that might happen now if it's over 40,000 different computers. It's, you know, it's been authenticated across the world. So that transparency that is innate in the way that it's created means that where we're headed to creates only more authenticity and transparency. So for me, that's super attractive. And I don't know if it speaks to the technical, but just how it might apply to our everyday lives.
Carolyn, would you mind explaining a little bit how the transparency actually works in blockchain without getting too incredibly geeky about it? But how that would affect our sense of how our identity would be created on the blockchain?
Sure. Well, I could get a bit geeky and I guess talk about the transparency in a blockchain is it's a fundamental characteristic of it. A blockchain it's a ledger or a shared source of truth that will give you the state of a set of data at a certain time, or the state of a whole mass of transactions at a set of time. But it is not owned by anybody or one central party. It is distributed over a huge network of 70,000, 40,000 computers all over the globe right now that is constantly being validated by all of the people running that program. And at the same time, anybody can look into it and see exactly what all of those transactions are. And
I have a quick question. When you say somebody can look into it, if I have a piece of information in there I don't want people to see, like, no, this is private, is there any way to protect that privacy?
Yes. There are innovations in blockchain right now. So right now, the original iteration of blockchain was had transactions. They were pseudonymous, not completely anonymous, right? But you just didn't know. You could see when you're looking. When I'm talking about the transparency of blockchain, I'm saying that you can actually see people's public keys, which are these really long hexadecimal strings. They don't kind of look familiar to your average person. So there's, I think, a problem here of tech literacy in a sense, and I think you're right in that question about values and who's writing the code, because even though it is something that is decentralized and democratic, and anybody who wants to learn about it and get into it can have a say about how it's governed, there is still a barrier there in terms of technical literacy. But privacy, getting back to that. Now there are this innovation called ZK snarks, which essentially it's a whole new cryptographic way to make transactions in the blockchain completely anonymous and private, so you can't exactly see that data, basically. I don't know if you can talk more about that.
Actually, I think, can I just riff for a moment on, I think there's an important point to make here, that Ethereum is, for all of the excitement and hype and value, it's 2 years old, and technology takes a while to mature. And frankly, you can't do that much on the Ethereum blockchain right now because the performance isn't that great. It's quite expensive to do transactions on it. It hasn't quite figured out the privacy thing yet. It's a little expensive. But like, these are all things which have solutions coming down a timeline in months. There's going to be a thing called sharding that makes it much more performant. ZK Snark's going to be worked in, so you can have private data. So there's a sort of sense that in terms of affecting the public today, mostly it's about the projects that people are trying to build things on it that mostly won't affect your life unless you jump in and become part of the project and throw yourself in. We haven't yet had kind of global scale applications like the first Facebook come out of the blockchain. But again, that's measured in, it's not going to be long before that starts happening.
Okay, so you see examples, people write about blockchain could replace Facebook. Could one of you explain to me how?
Maybe now's a good time to talk a little bit more about identity and self-sovereign identity and what the hell that even means and what that has to do with blockchains. And I know that was one of your original points, so glad we're getting to it. I think probably most of you know, the way the internet works right now in terms of the way that your personal data is being used, and the way that these tech behemoths like Google and Facebook are actually, even though it may seem seamless that you're talking to your friend on Facebook, or you're Googling something and you're using that search engine's service, and there doesn't seem to be somebody in there taking a cut of something or a fee, right? But actually they are, because they have all your personal data and they are extracting value from it, and you as an end user have no control over how they use that data. You really have no idea how they use that data. I think that I have a cousin that works for Facebook, and he assures me that Facebook acts as kind of in a fiduciary role, and they don't sell your data, but they do, but only in these very anonymized ways that really kind of, they put you into just a subset with characteristics, and nobody actually knows who you are, and that's true. But the fact is, this is something that the average person knows nothing about. Even some more educated folks in kind of the way the internet works, and we know a little bit about it, but we don't know how our data is being used and monetized at the end of the day. That the end user is not seeing the rewards or the benefits or the value that your personal data is actually creating. So in terms of the Facebook question, what the blockchain can potentially do is, first of all, provide you with a self-sovereign identity that is defined and validated by a blockchain, rather than an identity that is defined and validated by the government, when they issue you a birth certificate, or Twitter, when you log on to some external application using your Twitter verification, right? Their identity.
When you say the blockchain validates you, who is the blockchain that validates you? I mean, when you're saying, is that just one blockchain that has your identity, or there are just lots and lots and lots of different places on the internet where your identity is being held in all these different blockchains?
So I guess I'm speaking in kind of a one blockchain world. So the identity piece is really kind of extrapolating identity from the idea of a wallet, so to speak, like a digital wallet. So if you're familiar with the blockchain, you're familiar with the idea of maybe you've messed around with Bitcoin and Ether, and you know that your Bitcoins and your Ethers are in your digital wallet, right, on Coinbase or wherever you have it. So the idea with digital identity, and Consensus is working on a project called Uport that's doing this, is that you have a wallet essentially that represents your identity, but instead of coins in it, you have digital assets that are actually attestations that you are who you say you are. So an attestation can be, my name is Carolyn. An attestation can be, Carolyn lives in New York City, or Carolyn has a bachelor's degree, anything like that. Carolyn lives at 123 Main Street, and those attestations, much like any transaction on a blockchain, are validated by the entire blockchain, and they're not kind of controlled by a central party or institution. And there's kind of cryptographic things behind kind of how you.
And if you don't actually have a degree, but you're claiming that you do, what happens?
Then nobody would validate that attestation.
So there's a validation process somewhere in that.
Well, that kind of is getting into a system where maybe there's reputation, and there's like curated registries involved, and so there's all these complex ways to solve that problem that we haven't completely figured out yet. This is something that some of the brightest cryptographic minds are thinking about right now, but there's a whole bunch of different cryptographic games, I guess, that you would institute using tokens or blockchain, other things like that.
So let's assume that all the problems are solved, and that some years from now, this has now been built in its totality. What changes in terms of how you, as a citizen, as an individual, are doing stuff, in the world, in terms of your own identity and your reputation?
Sure. Well, actually, I'll use an example that it could potentially happen today, right now. So think about all of the vulnerable populations in the world who we would call them maybe they're the unbanked. I think they say there are like 80 million people in the world who are unbanked, maybe even more. Or think about a population like refugees, or a population victims of sex trafficking. People that have no way to have an identity issued to them the way you or I may have through a government. Those people have no way of, when they do kind of come into safety or, come into a better life, they have no way of proving who they are. And we have no way of proving who you are. You can't have a bank account. You can't sort of participate in the economic system in a way that would be able to kind of bring you to a better life.
I was just going to say, this is actually one of my heart projects as well, and it's one of the challenges with getting nation states to accept people, is because they don't have any records. There's no way of proving who they are. They don't have any assets. They're starting basically at zero. So, being able to set up a system by which we can start to contribute these people that are in the most dire situations with the refugee crisis, whether they're climate refugees or refugees of war, that they can actually start to have a future to look forward to, is what you're speaking about.
Exactly, and how the blockchain identity links in with this is essentially, you can imagine a world where individuals have an identity that's on the blockchain that is self-sovereign and owned by them, and it can't be taken away by any sort of government in a regime change, because it's not controlled or owned by them.
There's a fundamental property of the blockchain that it allows you to make digital things of which there is only one or only a scarce number. If I have a movie, I can send you the movie very easily in a way that, years ago I wouldn't have been able to email it to you, but I still have a copy of the thing. There's no sort of movie that when I send it to you, I lose it. And so the whole question of value transfer in the current internet is kind of muddy. In the blockchain, you can have a single yes, you can define bitcoins, but you can also use blockchains to record land registries. You can use blockchains to record title to things. Essentially, all of the relationships of who owns what, who is whom, and how do we relate to each other. And that goes all the way down to Facebook likes and all the way up to what it means to be a citizen. And to be able to move the, all central phenomena like governments and corporations, etc., on some level, fictions, as like Rodrigo was saying, magical lies that we have created in order to interact socially with each other and do things in, what in various ways we've obviously thought are better ways, although, not always. And so the blockchain essentially enables a thing called a protocol to take a lot of the burden and the weight that we've been having to put on the other institutions, the other magical lies like governments and banks and armies that we've needed to use to relate to each other. So that's the magic of it, is that it makes it, when Carolyn said it sort of creates scarcity, you might think, well, why would you want to create scarcity? But the idea of having a digital thing that there is only one of means you can then move that thing around the world on rails, and using Ethereum or another blockchain, everyone in the world can see immediately at once, replicated all around the world, how that house has moved from one person to another, the cars moved from one person to another. All of that not only is going to make doing the things that we do right now much cheaper, more frictionless, more global, take rent seekers out of the middle, it's going to enable us to do a whole bunch of things that, as is being clear from the conversation, we haven't really quite figured out yet.
Well, a main one, just to speak to that point as well, which is a big challenge in the world, is like our health records. It's so frustrating. Excuse me. I've been juvenile diabetic since I was 23. And every time I see a new doctor or go to a new place, they have to take my blood, they have to take my x-rays, So being able to have your sovereign identity, which is something you own, which the hospitals don't own, and that are not siloed in data, and basically whether they're data files or just paper files, of like what our health record is, and it actually follows you, and it's also something you can monetize if you own that, so you can make that information available if you choose. So it's a big solution, right?
Okay, so let's open it up to questions from you all. You got one? Here.
Oh my. So my understanding of how credibility works on blockchains is that the first creator is the most credible. When you were talking about identity, I'm wondering, when there's some platform to put your identity on the blockchain, how big is the risk of an attack where an attacker creates a lot of identities, which are the first ones, and then it's very hard for the real people to then come in and take those back because the first one appears most credible on the block?
There are thousands of blockchain-based networks that have grown up into existence in the last couple of years, and that probably 90% of them will die at some point. What you're saying is absolutely right. In any network of that kind of design, there is more power at the beginning of the network before it scales. But I believe that unhealthy networks will be outcompeted by healthy ones. That's kind of it. If you have that thing, at some point, if there are malicious actors at the center of the network who are starting it, at some point they will compromise the value of the network. So, I do think there's a real thing that power is going to be distributed in an asymmetrical way in any blockchain that you boost up from scratch. So You know, anything like Steemit. People who don't know, Steemit is a social media platform, kind of like a Reddit, but people get paid for posting, and they pay to upvote and downvote other people's posts using a currency called the Steem, and that currency appreciated massively. In fact, went up in value like 20 times and crashed, and has all kinds of interesting ups and downs. But there's a whole sort of little economy there. But you know what? The guys who started and the first people who contributed ended up with a lot more steam, and so they now have more opinion on Steemit than people who arrive later. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It's human.
I realize that everyone comes in here with different levels of understanding and background in this, so please indulge the question. What is blockchain? I mean, seriously, I would love to walk out of here with just a more advanced understanding. I understand ledger, and then we got into some arcane applications. But if you could just indulge me with your best explanations about what it is, like how does, just in any metaphor that you could possibly put together. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that.
I'm going to hand it off to one of these two to say the what is blockchain, but I just want to set a little context that since I've been in this conversation, I've been really appreciating what has been disruptive that we just accept as normal these days. Like, just as a context, right? Because we really are in early days of this, and so as much as we might think we know, it's still revealing itself. And so we had lunch today with E-Trade, right? And if you think backwards, like to think that you could actually go online and make a stock exchange and that's accepted now, or even as simple as like WordPress, right? Which was not that long ago. You know, I met one of the guys from WordPress recently and was just asking where they are in this space. And they were the original open source, right? They basically, the way we use the internet today is because of WordPress, which was solving a solution. So, I mean, it's actually solving for something. So I feel like the opportunity is here that we're actually solving for something that humanity and the people that are buying into this are driving. And then I want to hand it off to both these amazing, brilliant people that might be able to. So I want to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So have you heard of Bitcoin? Cool. So that's like a really good place to start, or the best place to start when you're talking about blockchain, because Bitcoin was the first invention of blockchain. Blockchain it's the underlying tech that makes Bitcoin work, or any other sort of blockchain platform or application. It's all blockchain under the hood. So what Bitcoin was really exciting, but it only kind of really did one thing, right? And that's the currency, the decentralized currency, being able to send value back and forth, or to this guy to that guy to this guy, and be able to do that without a central institution like verifying all of those transactions, without a bank being able to verify that. It was done in all of these shared computers, and that's the shared ledger, right? But at the end of the day, that's cool, but it's really kind of just one thing. I kind of like to think of it as like a calculator sort. That's my loose analogy. The next generation of blockchains, which Ethereum is the biggest one, is sort of like 2.0. So think of Bitcoin like a calculator, and Ethereum is like a general purpose computer. You can do a lot more sophisticated and complex transactions and interactions, and that's because on this specific type of blockchain, you are encoding these little snippets of code called smart contracts onto each transaction, and those snippets of code, essentially why they're so cool is you can encode business logic into them, and any sort of business logic possible. From simple sort of escrows, or any sort of if this then that kind of command, and kind of building out from that and thinking about a decentralized world computer where you can execute all these pieces of code and automate a lot of things in a decentralized way. You can really build any sort of application that we use today, but in a decentralized way. Not today, because as Alex said, we're only 2 years old at this point, and there's a lot more to figure out and in terms of scaling and actually getting there. But eventually the idea is you're gonna be able to build something like a decentralized Uber or a decentralized Airbnb, where you are actually having true peer-to-peer interactions and transactions with people. So instead of Airbnb being in the middle of your interaction with a peer and taking a cut out of it, it's just purely code and the blockchain validating that code in between two humans interacting. And the example of the internet, right? I gave the example of Facebook and Google are sucking the value out of your data because all of that information is going through their central servers, right? In a decentralized system, that's not happening, and you can build systems where that data is owned by individuals.
And just speaking to that for a minute, and I'll hand it to you as well, is it's not just business agreements that can be in those contracts. It's anything you and I agree. And it's really the value by which we build communities. So what you and I agree is so in our exchange versus someone telling us what we agree, right? Which is one of the reasons it's so exciting to me. So,
how you doing? Do you feel like you have moved towards blockchain enlightenment, or do you remain in blockchain darkness?
So in a very large-scale economy with large numbers of people who do not know each other, you think about if you walk out in the street, you're characterized by all these interactions with people you do not know, right? Normally, in order for that to actually work, you need these central intermediaries that mediate the relationships between these people so that you can trust them, that you can do various things. If you want to achieve the same thing without having a central intermediary, essentially you need some kind of protocol that enables people to interact with each other to keep a sense of their relative state relative to each other. Bitcoin just happened to do that with the movement of money tokens between people. If you want like an example in this room right now, it would be, imagine we were trying to keep an exact account of what everybody on the front there said, and then everybody had a computer on their lap with an Excel spreadsheet, and the job I gave you was to say, every time they say something, record it. All right? And then you all also have to keep exactly the same account of what's happening. And then they're going to come back to us and ask us and to see if this is exactly the same account. Of course, this would never happen, right? You would have a notary who would record the official account. What the blockchain technology stuff is essentially enabling is to enable that situation where a whole bunch of different people running their own systems can collectively keep exactly the same account, which creates a situation as if there is only one account. Okay, so like a floating Excel spreadsheet, as it were. That's kind of created through that situation.
Good. Thank you very much. So this leads me to the big question that I have. Does that answer the question for you? Did I really do it? Okay. So
can I just
can I
just say word?
Yes. So then the devil's advocate position becomes, and this is still my big question, you're essentially saying that what we now have in centralized databases that manage relationships between people becomes distributed so it's on everybody's computer effectively. So it's not in one place, it's in many places. So what? Once you get the information in many, many places at once, there's still a long way to go from that to social services or social engagements and interactions that actually empower people rather than legacy institutions. And so there's a lot of thinking through this minutia that is now being done. People are clearly doing it, right? But where is that dialogue happening? Who's part of that conversation, right? Who's writing that code? Because it's ultimately always, like Lawrence Lessig once said, code is law, right? So where is the public discussion about this happening, and how can people who are not coders participate in that conversation?
I want to just land one thing on the strangers thing first, which is the protocol is brilliant enough that it's not just with strangers. Like up to 50% of the strangers can be kind of active, almost 50% of the strangers can be actively malevolent, and everybody is safe. If you walk down New York City streets, how bad it would be if only even 1% of the people were malicious actors, let alone 10 or 20% who are trying to steal from you. But we have institutions of police and civil society and norms here. As we've seen on Facebook comments, norms are a little different in the digital world. And so the brilliance of a thing called Byzantine fault tolerance, which is essentially a reference to an old problem of how you attack a city without knowing if the guy on the other side's attacking first. This thing is woven in, which allows networks to handle large amounts of mistrust and still have a highly trusted outcome. So, still, so what? But I just wanted to touch on that.
I mean, that's interesting, because then you sort of step back again, and this is the other thing one of the things that struck me about blockchain is it's basically designed for a lot of people who don't trust each other to get locked into agreements that make it hard for them to lie to one another. Is that, you're shaking your head? So essentially, so then we talk about the civil society utopian vision that blockchain enables, but it's kind of based on this assumption that everybody really can't be trusted. I mean, am I fucking this up?
I mean, let's say I'd say the thrust of your questions tonight has been pretty much everybody can't be trusted. So.
No, that's correct. That's just game theory, and a lot of these designs are based on structured around game theoretical assumptions.
The entire history of money has to do with this question of trust. So if you go back to pre-500 BC, there were debt relationships, but there was no such thing as kind of coin of the realm until, say, 5th century Greece. And what the creation of coins that were sort of stamped and trusted meant that people from far away could trade with each other, whereas previously people were keeping tab of relationships only in their own community. And this created a massive boost in global trade and also completely changed human consciousness. Interestingly enough, around the axial age and the understanding that humans of having a god in the sky pretty much grew up in 3 places in the world pretty much at exactly the same time as we invented currency. Interesting fact. So blockchain right now is sort of like one of the major historical innovations in money. Like there have been a few, but probably like 5 in the last sort of 2,500 years, like paper and kind of fiat currency and fractional reserve and like CDOs maybe. But there's a fundamental, every one of those things has not only shifted how we've been able to relate, it's also even shifted our sense of who we are in the world. And the sort of the axial age of gods around money is an interesting thing when one looks at actually what is happening to human consciousness around the blockchain. And I want to just speak sort of personally for a moment. Since I've been in the crypto world for the last year, everything's been really fast and really weird and really intense and really bizarrely synchronistic, like weirdly so in ways that, anyone in the audience feel the same way? So there's something going on here. And, none of us really know quite what it is. And then there's another interesting thing that Ethereum is designed in such a way that AIs, smart contracts, pieces of code, have the same level of rights and access as human beings in the system, can have bank accounts, can interact with each other, can have relationships with each other, and can even employ humans. And this is interesting. This is weird. I say sometimes when I imagine, our future AI overlords, like, I'd be like, hey, I was part of the thing that emancipated you AIs from slavery. Like, maybe they'll, make batteries out of me later or something. But seriously, like, there's something in the relationship of technology and money and human relationship and society and consciousness that's always been strangely interlinked. And alchemy and, Isaac Newton, major alchemist, as well as a physicist, people also many don't know that he ran the Royal Mint in London and basically originated fractional reserve banking to magically increase the money supply by 10 to pay for an army against France. So there's this whole human history of like war and religion and consciousness and society that's all been interlinked with changes in technology around how we assess value, which is really talking about money. Oh, it's finance. It's like, no, value is frozen desire. Value is what we want, and money is the symbol for how we hold and maneuver what we want among each other. And something's happening here. It's weird. It's crazy. It's, massive waves of sort of interest from Wall Street pouring into this thing, weird things going on, synchronicities. Who the hell knows? It's a strange world at the moment, but I'm still willing to bet on this being a good thing, despite the fact that, we are kind of a Larry species sometimes, and there are terribly weird power dynamics and things going on in this space as much as there are in any other.
I just want to speak back to the point of transparency. If we're here to talk about transformation and what this brings the opportunity for, is if we all get so much information and we stop spending all our time and energy trying to figure out what's true, and we just show up with the assumption that it's transparent so we can all see what's true, it builds trust automatically, because we don't have the time or the space to even lie or to fool ourselves, because it's transparent. Then my sense is that part of the quickening of all of this is because we've kind of automated that, right? So if it's a given that it's transparent, and it's a given that what it says it is, and what it does, then how can we quickly just move on to what's next? So.
We'll do one last question, and then we're gonna break this. We have a performance, right? After this.
Thank you. So there was a question about consequences or risks or things like that. So I have one for you. Within the UN, there's, at least that I know of, there's at least 15 different blockchain programs going on, pilots, things like that. One of those is being run by the World Food Program. And you would think that applying blockchain technology to food distribution is a really good idea, right? Because one of the big issues with food distribution, especially for emergency aid, is that there's tremendous amounts of waste. So, okay, they put the blockchain on top of that. This is a pilot program, I believe, run in Syria right now. And to go the last mile and to make blockchain truly effective is that you have to know who you're giving this food to. So how do you bridge that gap? Well, what's being done is the refugees that are coming for food aid are having their retinas scanned, and this completes the transactions. So my question to you guys is, one of the sort of rhetorical slippages as we talk about blockchain is about voluntary participation. And there's no real discussion about who owns the blockchain, because somebody owns it, right? Always somebody owns it. And And in this case, with the World Food Program, example that I'm bringing up, you wind up with a situation where you have the most vulnerable populations being told, if you want food, then give us your retinal scan information. And now it's on the blockchain. Whose blockchain? Well, it's the UN's blockchain, so it should be fine, right? But the UN is composed of member states, and member states make those policies. So essentially, you're back at a nation-state paradigm, and that's not even getting into the hacking, possibilities, because you're not just saying, oh, this is my identity because I'm so-and-so and I live on 123 Main Street and all these sorts of fungible pieces of information. You're actually talking about retinas. You're talking about about as close to singularly identifying biometric data that tracks a person for the rest of their life, whether they want to or not. So I'm very sorry for my long remark, but my question is, this is one of the more troubling examples for me in terms of where blockchain can abet authoritarian tendencies or create a situation that winds up having consequences for large groups of people for the rest of their lives. So can you guys kind of expound on how that can be prevented?
I want to speak first to anything that's been created by the system it's been created by is still the system itself. Right, so this is not anything new. It's something that's going on some level or some form within that situation, and it seems like people have shown up with trying to create a solution. And we go back to the most powerful thing about blockchain and about using these tools for good are the agreements that have to be formed first. Because if humanity doesn't come together and decide that there has to be agreement between people. So, if the people that were in the situation were given the right to, they get food regardless, but if they'd like to partake in some ownership of their information, they can have their retina scanned, which can help identify them, which could be a part of their future, right? So it just comes back to the society cause of what's right about society, what's not right about society, and no technology is going to solve that. We have to do that as humans. So.
How much more time do we have? One more question? Okay, you got a great quick question. It's going to be a really long answer.
Super quick. Okay, so we are obviously very inspired by all three of you guys, and you are all kind of coming in from different perspectives. Blockchain is a very difficult concept to understand. From your respective fields and perspectives, what sort of resources that would you suggest for us that can kind of highlight how you see blockchain from your individual perspectives, like books and websites and the like? And I think that would be very valuable for all of us.
What should people read and what should they watch? Books and resources. So I got into blockchain from an interesting perspective. I'm not technical at all, never have been. I used to be a therapist. Social sciences was my background, and I won't get too much into it, but basically I got into Ethereum and blockchain because I understood in a very macro level. It kind of explained to me by, I guess, a good marketer and a couple of friends who saw the sort of the legal and identity perspectives of it, and also understood the tech. But I really immediately understood the social, economic, and political, cultural, philosophical implications of what decentralizing technology meant, and I kind of got the big picture first, and then I dove in and I got technical, and I learned about Merkle trees, and I read a lot of white papers, and I mostly just talked to a lot of people. But that's just kind of how I learn. It's just finding the people that are doing this stuff and asking all those dumb questions over and over again. In terms of resources, there's some books out there that I like. I think Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper is a really interesting one. That one's kind of, it talks about some of the history of money in society and some of the things that Alex was coming from. I also like The Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott. I think that's a good one that takes a look at kind of broader business and society use cases. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I want to throw it back to each person. Instead of going out there and trying to figure out what it is, to really think about what your interests are, and knowing that there's some way you can engage based on what you have as value and what you're interested in, and find that. Like if you're an artist, find a group that values art, and then you can get paid for contributing something as art, whether you're a graphic designer or you're a music maker, and whatever your interest is, there's a way to actually earn a currency on blockchain to participate in the community, because really it's a community model. So if we go back to that thing which drives us, and we're really focused, instead of trying to learn something from an intellectual place and try to fit in because it's currency or money or whatever we might think it is, but find it from the passion, then it's gonna feel a lot more fun.
Where do I find a art blockchain that will buy my art?
Artchain.com. I actually do think that's a great intro. I mean, if you're into art, Google art blockchain. If you're into renewable energy, Google renewable energy blockchain. Because blockchain is a sort of fundamental bottom level technology, which is part of what makes it hard to explain, there is pretty much Google anything blockchain and you'll find something interesting. If you want to get more fun, Google your thing, blockchain, white paper, and you will probably find a 20 or 30 page document that someone has written about how to create a decentralized community of value around that thing. And some of them are amazing and some of them are terrible. Another thing you can do is go to coinmarketcap.com. So that's a site that lists all of the different currencies. And if you click on them, yes, you'll see price charts. If you're interested in the trading, you can see that side of things. We didn't talk much about that, but lots of people find that very cool. But if you also just click through, you'll find links in there to white papers, to websites and things, and you can really access a lot from that. And if you are interested in trading, you can come to my website and look up omega.one, omega.one, and poke around on there and drop me an email.
How many coins are there now? I know you know this.
There are 1,149 different cryptocurrencies, but the top 20 account for some 90% of all of the value.
I want to thank.
I just want to say as well, if anyone is interested in the social impact piece, come find me. I love it. I can direct you if you have ideas and concepts you want to launch into this space. I'm looking actively. So it's been an honor. And I just, it's like I'm so crazy passionate about how we can use this to actually be in service. And it's on the bio, yeah. Then my bio's there with my domain.
And I'll just plug one last resource. Consensus Media has a really great YouTube channel that gets really technical at times and really, really not technical. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Just watch a few 3-minute videos and learn some things.
Yeah, and mine's futureofhumanity.io. If you want me, it's there. You can get me.
You have nothing else to say?
So Ken, what is the blockchain and why does it matter to you?
And with that, I want to thank our speakers tonight.
No, wait, that's a real question.
Okay. You're gonna
Where do? So I just want to say that Ken is one of those people that really started the revolution of what's happening in technology. So I just want you to speak a little bit about where you see this going.
Anybody wants to know about the history of technology, you can talk to me afterwards at the bar.
No, but where do you see this going? That's a real question. Where do
I see it going?
Uh-huh.
Okay, in 30 seconds or less. There's a tremendous potential, as there has been with these distributed networks and technology for quite a while. There's also, frankly, a lot that hasn't been figured out yet. And there is not, I feel, a well-informed public discussion that is engaging all of the players in civil society who need to be at the table to participate in the writing of the core code that's going to ultimately make the difference between whether this is a technology that's going to emancipate people or whether it becomes more of the same in terms of
in terms of how power is still concentrated in the hands of relatively small numbers of folks, and the power of computing to increase decentralization of power. We've seen this over the last couple of decades. It's truly, quite large, and we need to really think that through in a fundamental way. But, and so I apologize for being, essentially the negative guy. But the intention for tonight was to test a lot of the utopian assumptions of what blockchain is about, because we hear all these amazing things, and frankly, most of us haven't a clue what this really means. And so I really appreciate you all taking the time tonight, and everybody who stayed. I appreciate you staying and listening to this and participating. And if nothing else, what this convinced me here working with Assemblage on events that we're doing is that we need to have more events that dive into these kinds of topics and find different ways to address it that's going to really help to engender that conversation. And that's what this place is really about. And that's why it's so great to have you all here. And we hope to see you come back. If you haven't had a tour yet of the space and you would like to see all 12 stories, including the office space, the different public spaces that are on the second and the 12th floor, and the roof, which is pretty awesome, with a great view, which you haven't seen, you should see. You should be talking to Heidi over there, or who else? Erin. And Erin will now take the microphone and figure out what's next.
I think what he just said is that that's a big call to action, and we need everybody to get involved. So please, yeah.
So thank you, Alex, Melinda, and Carolyn.